I'm a Dead Space fan, and I have Game Pass Ultimate on my Xbox account, so when I saw that Dead Space Ignition is included in Game Pass Ultimate, I thought to myself, I've never played this before, let's give it a shot.
CPD, get out of the way, move!
Within 5 minutes, I was ready to turn it off. Going into it, I knew nothing about Dead Space Ignition except that you played as Franco, the guy who wakes up Isaac in Dead Space 2. So I was completely caught off guard when the game started and I found out what it was. The first thing that stuck out is that the animation specifically is terrible.
You think you could have been any less subtle?
Oh my god, this looks awful.
And because Dead Space back in the day was trying to be a transmedia franchise, meaning it branched into different mediums than just games, and to get everything out of the lore you had to consume different types of media, I guessed that Dead Space Ignition was originally an actual comic that they took and turned into a game, which would make sense why it appeared that nothing in motion in the cutscenes looked like it was intended to ever be animated, because it was originally a comic. I was incorrect. They just chose a comic style for this game and did an absolutely terrible job at it. But if there is a reason to play Dead Space Ignition, it is for the cutscenes and the story. So the game starts off, and you're introduced to Franco Delisle, an engineer who you play as, and Sarah Anderson, a cop whose first line of the game is a "That's what she said" joke.
See, that wasn't so hard.
That's what she said.
Got him! Got him!
Franco's boss Weaver comes in and tells him that there's a broken door that Franco needs to fix. Anderson comes with, and when they reach the door, you're introduced to the first of the 3 different minigames. This game, Dead Space Ignition, essentially, is just cutscenes interrupted by terrible hacking minigames. So whatever momentum the story may be building is constantly interrupted by unfun gameplay. In the first minigame, you're a red dot, and you have to get to the end before the blue dots. After beating this minigame, a guy tells you there's another guy with a broken computer. After jumping on a train and flirting a bit, Franco and Sarah reach the computer, and you're now introduced to the second minigame.
I was not paying attention at all. I have no idea what to do. It looks like I can just mash the A button, so I'll just do that.
After this, Franco and Sarah gear up to go into outer space to fix something else. You do get a bit of characterization where Franco talks about not liking going into space and how he was born on a planet, the implication being that Sarah was born on a space station. Once in space, Franco finds a problem and we're introduced to the final minigame. In this one, you have to place panels and direct each light beam to its corresponding port. Red goes to red and green goes to green. After beating this, Franco starts to drift away from the station and panics even though he was tethered the whole time. They get back inside, but there's a problem with the airlock, which means another minigame. But it gets even better. After beating the panel game, you're rewarded with a chance to play the dot racing game.
I am really regretting my decision to play this game.
And I'll admit, this was really tense for me. Not because it was fun, but because I didn't want to lose and have to replay it. Franco and Sarah keep going and are on their way to get lunch when necromorphs show up. The violence and language that ensues is in pretty big contrast to the minigames for 10-year-olds that make up the gameplay. Sarah has the patented Dead Space moment where she figures out you have to dismember the necromorphs to kill them, and her and Franco escape on the tram. While on board, Franco gets a call from Weaver saying there's a lighting failure that needs to be fixed because necromorphs are harder to fight in the dark, while Sarah's ex-police partner tells her about a hostage situation. This leads you to your first choice of the game. This game actually does have branching paths based on your choices, which, to digress from giving a synopsis of it for a second, I think this game could have been legitimately good had it been executed by a studio like Telltale. Remove all the terrible gameplay and just have it be an interactive story in the Dead Space universe. Instead of the mini-games, just give more options for paths and different choices. No one who was interested in Dead Space Ignition, I'm assuming, was interested in it because they just love hacking mini-games.
Oh boy, 3 a.m.
I'm guessing all the interest came from being a fan of the universe and the lore. Double down on that side rather than repeatedly interrupting the story for, again, terrible, horrible, no good, very bad minigames. I chose to rescue the hostages. After arriving, Franco and Sarah get more details and learn that a husband has gone insane and is holding his wife and children hostage. The police officer mentions that they've had several similar cases in the past few days, which we as an audience know is because of the red marker. The crazy guy is an engineer himself and hacked into surveillance, so the cops can't get close to him without knowing, so Franco decides to do a bit of hacking himself, and you have another minigame.
I like how right when the story is starting to pick up, they stop it for this.
Afterward, the cops fill the crazy guy with bullet holes. You do another very exciting hacking minigame. Then Franco gets on the horn with Weaver, who asks him to put a large sector into quarantine. Franco refuses because he doesn't want to trap everyone who's still alive and, quote, sign their death warrant. Sarah says that he wouldn't be signing their death warrant because he'd just be following orders, so it wouldn't be his fault, which gives us another piece of lore that in the Dead Space universe, the Nuremberg trials are no longer taught about in schools. And eventually, Franco is convinced that the necromorphs can't be allowed to spread, and you get to do another hacking minigame. After beating the 2 hacking minigames, Franco and Sarah get attacked by a necromorph that jumps out of the vent. This tells them that quarantine and locking down all the doors is completely useless and they did nothing but block people's escape. Franco has the idea to go to the hospital because that's where he's expecting evac to start, but he gets another call to go fix the life support systems out in space. This was my second choice of the game, where I could choose to go directly to the hospital inside the station or go into space, fix the life support, and then walk outside into space to get to the hospital. I chose space. You do another minigame, then you get attacked by a necromorph. Sarah gets her suit punctured, you do another minigame to change her oxygen output or something. At this point in the game, I was completely just checked out, and by the time you get inside, she's dead. Press F to pay respects. Franco gets another call from Weaver, smashes his earpiece, and heads to the hospital and winds up in the psychiatric unit, and after another minigame, he frees Isaac Clarke and the game just ends.
That's it?
It's super abrupt, but thankfully if you are interested in the conclusion of Franco's character arc, it was fleshed out in Dead Space 2. That's Dead Space Ignition. In its defense, it was a $5 Xbox Live arcade game, so I wasn't expecting a 10 out of 10, nor should I have. That being said, there are really good arcade games that do exist, and this certainly was not one of them. But it was included in Game Pass, so I lost nothing except an hour and a half of my life that I will never get back, plus all the time that I put into this video, but hey, I unlocked a new suit for Dead Space 2. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed this, check out my other video, or videos if you're watching in the future, and consider subscribing and smash the like button and all that stuff. I will just also say too, it really threw me off the ending of Dead Space Ignition because it really just ends abruptly and with no warning.